Judge Thomas said repeatedly that he had not come, in a sense, to be confirmed or not confirmed. He came to clear his name. There has been a great many references this week to the crisis of life which both Judge Thomas and Professor Hill have reached. And he said he welcomed this opportunity. When the FBI came to his house in September, he said, I was shocked, I was surprised, I was hurt, I was enormously saddened. He said during his time at the EEOC, you'll hear those letters a lot of the time, it's the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and it is the place in the federal government where if someone believes they have been sexually harassed, they go to make a complaint. And Judge Thomas said he thought he understood the anguish and the seriousness of such matters, but I think as many men around the country and many women will have discussed this week, sometimes men don't always understand. In fact, often men don't understand the anguish and the seriousness of such matters, and we can't speak to the discussions in your home or your workplace this week, but in this particular workplace, men have been obliged to discover this week that sometimes their behavior is not seen in the same fashion by women as it is by them. Try to put that as neutrally as possible. So we're waiting for Professor Hill. We will be right back.
Our Glade Country Pottery has fresh new designs.
Put out the pottery, put it here, put it there.
The porous clay releases the fresh scent for 30 days
Just put out the pottery.
in new decorative designs.
This is a tough business. Half of the time is spent cleaning. So you learn a few shortcuts. There's no secret formula for cleaning grease unless it's Formula 409. Nothing works harder and nothing works faster.
Formula 409, your secret formula for cutting grease.
What's in your mouth?
Nothing.
I bet it's something mushy.
Maybe.
It's not sex, it's that mushy stuff, right?
How do you know?
No crunchy noises and no smiley face.
Now Rice Chex has a crunchy new shape and a great crunchy taste.
Okay, obliged. Here comes the check. Now you're not making mush mouth.
If you haven't tried the delicious taste of Chex cereal, you gotta check out Chex.
You do what I want to do, go where I want to go, just think you ought to know. Scamp. You walked away with my heart.
Meet Scamp, the walking cuddle puppy. You can put him on his leash and he's ready to walk and talk. Take him off and he's yours to cuddle.
You're with me night and day, I just want to say, Scamp.
You walked away with my heart. Scamp, the walking cuddle puppy from Tiger Toys.
Outside the Senate hearing room waiting for Professor Hill to come. She's come to Washington with her legal representatives, of course, and also some of her family. She's one of 13 children. What has struck many people in the country as sort of fascinating and agonizing and tantalizing about this whole procedure has been how Professor Hill and Judge Thomas are very much from the same background. Two black Americans who worked themselves up from poverty to positions of considerable importance in government, both of them who have been committed in some respects to civil rights, both of them who have seen the law and have found the law to be a ready means, or should I say a hard work means of access into higher positions of influence in the country than they might have otherwise achieved. As I said, Professor Hill has with her a legal team which consists of two women from Phoenix, Arizona. I can't tell you much about them at the moment, I'm afraid. A well-known lawyer from Washington named Michelle Roberts, and also Susan Deller Ross, who's a professor of law at Georgetown University, and that, of course, is Professor Hill. Judge Thomas has already spoken about the agony that he has gone through this week. He said, I've not done what she has alleged. I do not know what I've done to cause her to make these accusations. And it is fair to say, surely, that Professor Hill, who always wanted these allegations to remain private, she has said, on a couple of occasions this week, has
Welcome,
had to
Professor
endure
Hill.
the spotlight to a greater extent than she ever imagined this week. Senator
Professor, let me
Rogers.
explain what the procedure will be while your family and others are being seated. In a moment, I will ask you to stand to be sworn, at which time, when that is finished, we'll invite you to make any statement that you wish to make. And then what we will do is I will begin by asking you some questions. And then Senator Specter will ask you some questions. And then Senator Leahy will ask you some questions. And then I assume it will be Senator Specter again, but I am not certain of that. We'll ask you questions. And again, welcome. We're happy that you are here. And let us stand and be sworn, if you will. Professor, do you swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. Professor Hill, please make whatever statement you would wish to make to the committee.
Mr. Chair,
Excuse me, Fred. I instruct the officers, do not let anyone in or out of that door while Professor Hill is making her statement.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Thurman, members of the committee, my name is Anita F. Hill, and I am a professor of law at the University of Oklahoma. I was born on a farm in Okmulgee County, Oklahoma in 1956. I am the youngest of 13 children. I had my early education in Okmulgee County. My father, Albert Hill, is a farmer in that area. My mother's name is Irma Hill. She is also a farmer and a housewife. My childhood was one of a lot of hard work and not much money, but it was one of solid family affection as represented by my parents. I was reared in a religious atmosphere in the Baptist faith, and I have been a member of the Antioch Baptist Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma since 1983. It is a very warm part of my life at the present time. For my undergraduate work, I went to Oklahoma State University and graduated from there in 1977. I am attaching to this statement a copy of my resume for further details of my education. Thank you. I graduated from the university with academic honors and proceeded to the Yale Law School, where I received my JD degree in 1980. Upon graduation from law school, I became a practicing lawyer with the Washington, D.C. firm of Wald, Harkrader, and Ross. In 1981, I was introduced to now Judge Thomas by a mutual friend. Judge Thomas told me that he was anticipating a political appointment, and he asked if I would be interested in working with him. He was, in fact, appointed as Assistant Secretary of Education for Civil Rights. After he had taken that post, he asked if I would become his assistant, and I accepted that position. In my early period there, I had two major projects. The first was an article I wrote for Judge Thomas's signature on the education of minority students. The second was the organization of a seminar on high-risk students, which was abandoned because Judge Thomas transferred to the EEOC, where he became the chairman of that office. During this period at the Department of Education, my working relationship with Judge Thomas was positive. I had a good deal of responsibility and independence. I thought he respected my work and that he trusted my judgment. After approximately 3 months of working there, he asked me to go out socially with him. What happened next and telling the world about it are the two most difficult experiences of my life. It is only after a great deal of agonizing consideration and great number of sleepless nights that I am able to talk of these unpleasant matters to anyone but my close friends. I declined the invitation to go out socially with him and explained to him that I thought it would jeopardize at the time I considered to be a very good working relationship. I had a normal social life with other men outside of the office. I believed then, as now, that having a social relationship with a person who was supervising my work would be ill-advised. I was very uncomfortable with the idea and told him so. I thought that by saying no and explaining my reasons, my employer would abandon his social suggestions. However, to my regret, in the following few weeks, he continued to ask me out on several occasions. He pressed me to justify my reasons for saying no to him. These incidents took place in his office or mine. They were in the form of private conversations which would not have been overheard by anyone else. My working relationship became even more strained when Judge Thomas began to use work situations to discuss sex. On these occasions, he would call me into his office for reports on education issues and projects, or he might suggest that because of the time pressures of his schedule, we go to lunch to a government cafeteria. After a brief discussion of work, he would turn the conversation to a discussion of sexual matters. His conversations were very vivid. He spoke about acts that he had seen in pornographic films involving such matters as women having sex with animals and films showing group sex or rape scenes. He talked about pornographic material depicting individuals with large penises or large breasts involved in various sex acts. On several occasions, Thomas told me graphically of his own sexual prowess. Because I was extremely uncomfortable talking about sex with him at all, and particularly in such a graphic way, I told him that I did not want to talk about these subjects. I would also try to change the subject to education matters or to non-sexual personal matters, such as his background or his beliefs. My efforts to change the subject were rarely successful. Throughout the period of these conversations, he also from time to time asked me for social engagement. My reaction to these conversations was to avoid them by eliminating opportunities for us to engage in extended conversations. This was difficult because at the time I was his only assistant at the Office of Education, or Office for Civil Rights. During the latter part of my time at the Department of Education, the social pressures and any conversation of his offensive behavior ended. I began both to believe and hope that our working relationship could be a proper, cordial, and professional one. When Judge Thomas was made chair of the EEOC, I needed to face the question of whether to go with him. I was asked to do so, and I did. The work itself was interesting, and at that time it appears that the sexual overtures which had so troubled me had ended. I also faced the realistic fact that I had no alternative job. While I might have gone back to private practice, perhaps in my old firm or at another, I was dedicated to civil rights work, and my first choice was to be in that field. Moreover, at that time, the Department of Education itself was a dubious venture. President Reagan was seeking to abolish the entire department. For my first month at the EEOC, where I continued to be an assistant to Judge Thomas, there were no sexual conversations or overtures. However, during the fall and winter of 1982, these began again. The comments were random and ranged from pressing me about why I didn't go out with him to remarks about my personal appearance. I remember his saying that someday I would have to tell him the real reason that I wouldn't go out with him. He began to show displeasure in his tone and voice and his demeanor, and his continued pressure for an explanation. He commented on what I was wearing in terms of whether it made me more or less sexually attractive. The incidents occurred in his inner office at the EEOC. One of the oddest episodes I remember was an occasion in which Thomas was drinking a Coke in his office. He got up from the table at which we were working, went over to his desk to get the Coke, looked at the can, and asked, "Who has put pubic hair on my Coke?" On other occasions, he referred to the size of his own penis as being larger than normal, and he also spoke on some occasions of the pleasures he had given to women with oral sex. At this point, late 1982, I began to feel severe stress on the job. I began to be concerned that Clarence Thomas might take out his anger with me by degrading me or not giving me important assignments. I also thought that he might find an excuse for dismissing me. In January of 1983, I began looking for another job. I was handicapped because I feared that if he found out, he might make it difficult for me to find other employment, and I might be dismissed from the job I had. Another factor that made my search more difficult was that there was a period, this was during a period of a hiring freeze in the government. In February 1983, I was hospitalized for 5 days on an emergency basis for acute stomach pain, which I attributed to stress on the job. Once out of the hospital, I became more committed to find other employment and sought further to minimize my contact with Thomas. This became easier when Allison Duncan became office director, because most of my work was then funneled through her, and I had contact with Clarence Thomas mostly in staff meetings. In the spring of 1983, an opportunity to teach at Oral Roberts University opened up. I participated in a seminar, taught an afternoon session and seminar at Oral Roberts University. The dean of the university saw me teaching and inquired as to whether I would be interested in pursuing a career in teaching, beginning at Oral Roberts University. I agreed to take the job in large part because of my desire to escape the pressure I felt at the EEOC due to Judge Thomas. When I informed him that I was leaving in July, I recall that his response was that now I would no longer have an excuse for not going out with him. I told him that I still preferred not to do so. At some time after that meeting, he asked if he could take me to dinner at the end of the term. When I declined, he assured me that the dinner was a professional courtesy only and not a social invitation. I reluctantly agreed to accept that invitation, but only if it was at the very end of a working day. On, as I recall, the last day of my employment at the EEOC in the summer of 1983, I did have dinner with Clarence Thomas. We went directly from work to a restaurant near the office. We talked about the work I had done, both at education and at the EEOC. He told me that he was pleased with all of it, except for an article and speech that I had done for him while we were at the Office for Civil Rights. Finally, he made a comment that I will vividly remember. He said that if I ever told anyone of his behavior, that it would ruin his career. This was not an apology, nor was it an explanation. That was his last remark about the possibility of our going out or reference to his behavior. In July of 1983, I left Washington, D.C. area and have had minimal contact with Judge Clarence Thomas since. I am, of course, aware from the press that some questions have been raised about conversations I had with Judge Clarence Thomas after I left the EEOC. From 1983 until today, I have seen Judge Thomas only twice. On one occasion, I needed to get a reference from him, and on another, he made a public appearance in Tulsa. On one occasion, he called me at home, and we had an inconsequential conversation. On one occasion, he called me without reaching me, and I returned the call without reaching him, and nothing came of it. I have, on at least 3 occasions, been asked to act as a conduit to him for others. I knew his secretary, Diane Holt. We had worked together at both EEOC and Education. There were occasions in which I spoke to her, and on some of these occasions, undoubtedly, I passed on some casual comment to then Chairman Thomas. There were a series of calls in the first 3 months of 1985, occasioned by a group in Tulsa, which wished to have a civil rights conference. They wanted Judge Thomas to be the speaker and enlisted my assistance for this purpose. I did call in January and February to no effect, and finally suggested to the person directly involved, Susan Cahall, that she put the matter into her own hands and call directly. She did so in March of 1985. In connection with that March invitation, Ms. Cahall wanted conference material for the seminar, and some research was needed. I was asked to try to get the information and did attempt to do so. There was another call about another possible conference in July of 1985. In August of 1987, I was in Washington, D.C., and I did call Diane Holt. In the course of this conversation, she asked me how long I was going to be in town, and I told her. It is recorded in the message as August 15th. It was, in fact, August 20th. She told me about Judge Thomas's marriage, and I did say, congratulate him. It is only after a great deal of agonizing consideration that I am able to talk of these unpleasant matters to anyone, except my closest friends, as I've said before. These last few days have been very trying and very hard for me. And it hasn't just been the last few days this week. It has actually been over a month now that I have been under the strain of this issue. Telling the world is the most difficult experience of my life, but it is very close to having to live through the experience that occasioned this meeting. I may have used poor judgment early on in my relationship with this issue. I was aware, however, that telling at any point in my career could adversely affect my future career. And I did not want, early on, to burn all the bridges to the EEOC. As I said, I may have used poor judgment. Perhaps I should have taken angry or even militant steps, both when I was in the agency or after I left it. But I must confess to the world that the course that I took seems the better as well as the easier approach. I declined any comment to newspapers, but later when Senate staff asked me about these matters, I felt I had a duty to report. I have no personal vendetta against Clarence Thomas. I seek only to provide the committee with information which it may regard as relevant. It would have been more comfortable to remain silent. It took no initiative to inform anyone. I took no initiative to inform anyone. But when I was asked by a representative of this committee to report my experience, I felt that I had to tell the truth. I could not keep silent.
Judge. Thank you very much. Judge, Professor, before I begin my questioning, notice there are a number of people sitting behind you. Are any of them your family members you'd like to introduce?
Well, actually, my family members haven't arrived yet. Yes, they have. They're outside the door. They weren't here for my statement.
Well, we will make room for your family to be able to sit.
It's a very large family,
Well,
Senator.
we will begin, but attempt to accommodate as quietly as we can what may be an unusual arrangement. I might ask, is everyone who is sitting behind you necessary and to sit behind you, and maybe they could stand and let your family sit? But we will, I would assume the reason why, to make it clear, the reason why your family is not here at the moment is that you did not anticipate coming. So if those who aren't absolutely necessary would stand with the rest of our staffs and let family members come in. Now, and we'll try to get a few more chairs if possible, but we should get this underway. My Lord.
Well, you've heard Professor Hill say that she comes from a large family born on a farm in Oklahoma. Her mother and father both farmers, and a number of members of her family have come with her today. Late because no one really anticipated that Professor Hill was going to testify at this particular time. Judge Thomas was going, I cannot even tell you if that's her father, but presumably she will at some point identify them.
Staff just began to carry some chairs out.
Judge Thomas, to the best of our knowledge, has gone home, so we cannot tell you whether or not he has seen this testimony. But it will be clear to people all over the country that in some respects this is now more tragic than the discussions which have taken place earlier this week as to whether men and women might interpret differently acts which in the mind of a woman might constitute sexual harassment, but in the mind of a man did not. Because in her testimony here today, Professor Hill makes very specific and very graphic charges.
Well, you all can stand.
We may at some point, Professor Hill, attempt to have to accommodate either your counsel and or your family members with chairs down the side there. They need not all be up front here. We cannot completely reconfigure this situation, okay? Fine, we can put them in the back as well. Now, would you, there are two chairs on the end here, folks.
As we did review Judge Thomas's testimony a couple of times for you, let me just try to catch up as best we can to some of the things which Professor Hill refers to. She referred to a final acceptance by her of a dinner engagement with Judge Thomas at the end of her employment at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission before she went to Oral Roberts University. And he said then, if I ever said anything, I would ruin his career. It was not a threat nor an apology. I've seen him only twice since then.
Family members to us.
Okay. I'd like to introduce, first of all, my father, Albert Hill.
Mr. Hill, welcome.
My mother, Irma Hill.
Miss Hill.
My mother is going to be celebrating her 80th birthday on the 16th.
Happy birthday in advance.
My sister, my eldest sister, Elretha Lee, is here. My sister, Joanne Fennell. My sister, Carlene Gilcrease. My sister, Joyce Baird.
I welcome you all. I'm sorry?
My brother, Ray Hill. I think that's everyone.
Thank you, Professor.
I'm sorry.
Please.
I would also like to introduce my counsel at this time.
Yes, that'd be appropriate.
Mr. Gardner, Miss Susan Ross, and Mr. Charles Ogletree.
Thank you. Now, Professor, Thank you for your statement and your introductions, and I think it's important that the committee understand a little more about your background and your work experience before we get into the specific allegations that you have made in your statement. I understand, as you've just demonstrated, you come from a large family, and I've been told that you've indicated you're the youngest in the family. Is that correct?
Yes, I am.
Now, I assume that, like all families, they've been of great help and assistance to you. Let me ask you, tell me again your educational background for the record.
I went to primary, elementary, and secondary school in Okmulgee County, in Morris High School, Morris Junior High, and Urim Grade School, in reverse order. I went to Oklahoma State University starting in 1973 and graduated in 1977 from Oklahoma State University with a degree in psychology. In 1977, I began attending Yale Law School. I graduated, received my JD degree from there in 1980.
Now, what was your first job after graduation from law school?
I worked at the firm of Wald, Harkrader, and Ross.
How did you acquire the job? That is a Washington law firm.
That is a Washington, D.C. law firm.
And how did you acquire that job?
Through the interviewing process, the first interview took place at Yale Law School. I was interviewed for that job. I don't remember the names of the interviewers. I was called to Washington for an interview in the office of Wald, Harkrader, and Ross. I was interviewed by a number of people, and I accepted an appointment with them. Now, I will say that that interview process was preceded by work that I had done with them as a summer associate. And so the interview process the second time around was really, well, actually, I'll say that the interview process took place before the summer associateship, and then at the end of that summer associateship, I was asked to work there full-time.
Who was your immediate supervisor when you were at that law firm?
Well, a number of individuals. I worked with a number of different attorneys on different projects.
So it would depend upon the project you were working on.
Yes.
Now, what type of work did you do while you were at the law firm? Was it specialized, or did you do whatever was asked of you of any of the partners?
Well, since I worked there for only 1 year. I was a fairly new associate. Most of my work was basically what was available and when I had time available to do it. However, I did some federal trade work. I did some environmental law work there, and I participated in the drafting of a manual on banking law while I was there.
Now, did you decide you wanted to leave that law firm, or was it suggested to you?
It was never.
Did someone approach you and say there's another job you might like, or did you indicate that you would like to leave the law firm to seek another job?
I was interested in seeking other employment. It was never suggested to me at the firm that I should leave the law firm in any way.
How old were you at this time?
At the time, I was